I'm Hunter Gorman. At 42, I'm a senior account manager at Halliday & Sons, a role I've held for nearly 14 years. During that time, I've been entrusted with managing the firm's top 15 clients, whose combined portfolios generate roughly $1.2 million in annual revenue. My work is not glamorous, but it's steady, built on meticulous documentation, strategic client relationships, and countless hours ensuring every detail aligns perfectly with contractual obligations. I pride myself on being the kind of professional who's always prepared and never caught off guard. Last Thursday, everything changed in a single, unexpected moment. We were gathered in the conference room for our weekly team meeting. 32 people were there. My colleagues, other account managers, junior staff, and our regional director, James Wentworth. The atmosphere had been typical at first. Routine updates, some projections for the quarter, and a few minor discussions about client feedback. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was seated near the center of the table, laptop open, notes ready, prepared to share my own progress and plans for upcoming client reviews. Then James stood up. There was a sudden sharpness in his tone that hadn't been there before. Without preamble, he launched into a critique of my client files, the very portfolios I had spent years nurturing. I watched, stunned, as he connected to my shared drive on the conference room projector. File by file, he began deleting critical client documents right in front of everyone. The room fell silent. No one moved. The clicking sounds of deletion echoed loudly, marking every erased client history, every contract detail, every meticulously kept note. I remember the weight of those seconds, the way the cool air felt heavier, the faint hum of the projector mixing with the soft murmurs of disbelief. 32 pairs of eyes watched as James clicked delete repeatedly, erasing years of work with a cold finality. It wasn't just files he was destroying, it was my professional credibility, my livelihood, and my reputation, all being dismantled publicly, systematically. I said nothing, no outburst, no protest, just a quiet, measured understood, which barely rose above the room's low chatter. On the surface, my voice was calm, almost detached. Inside, a storm was starting to build, but I bottled it carefully. I filed the moment away, committing it to memory and mental ledger. I knew then this wasn't a spontaneous act of frustration. It was calculated, a deliberate, strategic betrayal, planned by James to humiliate me, undermine my position, and justify some larger agenda. As the final client file vanished from the screen, James turned to the room and said flatly, "You're done here." There was a pause, a collective breath held by everyone. My face remained composed, though my mind raced. I felt the sting of betrayal, but also a strange clarity. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I absorbed the humiliation silently, understanding that this moment marked the opening move in a much deeper game. James's public deletion of my client files was not just an act of spite, it was a professional declaration, one that threatened my entire career and the $1.2 million worth of client assets I had managed to build and maintain. But beneath the surface of that calculated dismissal, I was already mobilizing my knowledge, my resources, and my contingency plans. I knew that the click of the delete button was merely the beginning of a battle I was determined to win. And so, as the meeting adjourned and murmurs began to fill the room again, I quietly closed my laptop, stood up with steady resolve, and left the conference room. What happened next would test everything I had built over the last decade and more. But in that moment, my outward calm masked a resolve as firm as steel. I was not defeated. Not yet. Over the course of 14 years at Halliday & Sons, I carved out a niche that went far beyond routine account management. My role evolved into something more strategic. I became the architect of client retention strategies that not only preserved, but consistently grew our revenue streams. Year after year, I led initiatives tailored to deepen client engagement, refine service delivery, and streamline communications. These efforts translated into an average annual revenue increase of 18%, a figure I tracked carefully through detailed quarterly analyses and performance reports. Numbers, after all, tell stories, and mine told one of steady growth and deepening trust. The foundation of this success wasn't just in numbers, but in the processes I created and refined. Early on, I recognized that managing high-value clients demanded more than just regular check-ins or reactive problem-solving. I built from the ground up a proprietary client management system, a digital framework combining structured data, personalized notes, progress trackers, and timelines for contract renewals. This system lived on encrypted drives, protected from unauthorized access, and was updated daily. It became my operational Bible, enabling me to anticipate client needs, spot potential risks, and deliver tailored solutions before issues could escalate. My commitment to documentation wasn't just about safeguarding my work. It was about building a transparent, replicable process that underscored reliability. Every phone call, every email, every meeting, each interaction was logged meticulously with detailed minutes and action items. I developed standardized templates for client feedback surveys, project status updates, and contract review checklists. These weren't just tools, they were proof of my diligence and accountability. Having this detailed paper trail meant that I could always demonstrate the due diligence I put into managing each account, reinforcing client confidence and providing a bulwark against disputes. This rigor didn't go unnoticed. Executive leadership valued my ability to deliver predictable, growing revenue streams while maintaining client satisfaction at the highest levels. Over the years, my salary rose accordingly, reflecting not just tenure but proven impact. Currently, it stood just above $118,000 annually. Beyond salary, my employment contract included comprehensive benefits, notably a severance clause guaranteeing a full 12-month payout should I be wrongfully terminated, a rare provision reflecting the firm's recognition of my value, but also a potential point of leverage. Clients themselves came to rely on me as more than just a contact person. I became their trusted advisor. Many senior executives from those top 15 accounts would reach out directly, seeking my insights on market trends or advice on navigating contract negotiations. This wasn't accidental. It was the product of years spent nurturing relationships grounded in honesty, responsiveness, and an unshakable commitment to their success. I knew the nuances of their business challenges intimately, which enabled me to anticipate shifts before they happened, positioning our firm as a proactive partner rather than a reactive vendor. But knowing my worth also meant recognizing the precariousness of my position amid shifting company priorities. Budget cuts and managerial reshuffles were an unspoken hazard in corporate life. Even with all my years of dedication, the cost of maintaining senior, highly compensated staff like me was a target when the pressure to trim expenses mounted. I was aware that my meticulous documentation, while a shield, also marked me as high cost in the eyes of leadership eager to streamline. Yet I trusted that the strength of my documented performance, combined with my contractual safeguards and strong client loyalty, would protect me against any sudden moves. In truth, the layers of protection I built, encrypted backups of every client portfolio, detailed logs of all communications, and a clear severance contract, were as much about professional prudence as they were about peace of mind. I had spent countless nights ensuring that no detail was overlooked, no record left unfiled. This wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. I understood that in a world where corporate politics and cost-cutting often trump loyalty, the most reliable defense was an unassailable paper trail coupled with contractual rights. That Thursday, as James Wentworth publicly deleted my client files, I felt the collision of all this preparation with a sudden, cold reality. My value, quantified through years of sustained growth and strategic innovation, was being reduced to a blink-and-you-miss-it act of sabotage. Yet beneath the shock, I found an odd reassurance. I had built a fortress of documentation and contractual leverage that couldn't be erased with a few clicks. What I considered my professional legacy wasn't confined to fragile digital folders on a shared drive. It was embedded in systems, backups, client trust, and legal protections, all working quietly in the background. The calm I maintained that day wasn't detachment. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knew their true worth and had prepared for moments like this. I recognized that this was no longer just about managing accounts or meeting quotas. It was a test of resilience, foresight, and strategic patience. My years of experience had taught me that success in this business wasn't just about winning today's deal, but about ensuring tomorrow's opportunities, even when faced with deliberate attempts to undermine you. So, as I sat there in that conference room, absorbing the weight of James's betrayal, I trusted in the foundation I had painstakingly built. The files he deleted would soon be restored from encrypted backups. My severance clause would come into play, and my clients, loyal and well-informed, would hear my side of the story. I wasn't just an expendable line item. I was a professional with a deep reservoir of value and a plan to reclaim what was rightfully mine. James Wentworth was under intense pressure. The third quarter's budget reviews were looming, and the executive team had demanded aggressive cost reductions across all departments. As regional director, James's mandate was clear: slash payroll expenses without sacrificing client deliverables, or at least create the appearance of doing so. It was a brutal balancing act, and unfortunately for me, I had become the prime target. His strategy was painfully straightforward. By publicly dismantling my client files in front of the entire team, James aimed to deliver a visible blow to my credibility, casting doubt on my competence and reliability. If he could convince everyone, including senior leadership, that I was negligent or worse, incompetent, it would justify terminating my position without the costly severance package I was contractually entitled to. And with a junior account manager ready to step in at roughly 40% less salary, the financial incentives for James couldn't have been clearer. But James's plan, while seemingly ruthless and efficient, overlooked several critical factors I had carefully safeguarded over the years. First, there was the severance clause in my contract, a rare provision in our industry specifying that wrongful termination, especially one unsubstantiated by performance metrics, would trigger a full 12-month salary payout. James either didn't understand how binding that clause was, or was counting on the humiliation to prevent me from leveraging it effectively. In his mind, public shaming and the apparent loss of client data would be enough to force a quick resignation, effectively sidestepping severance obligations. Second, and more importantly, James grossly underestimated the layers of protection I had built beneath the surface. For years, I had maintained encrypted backups of every portfolio under my management, secure offline copies stored in multiple locations precisely to guard against accidental deletion, data corruption, or, as it turned out, deliberate sabotage. These backups weren't just redundant files. They were meticulously updated, cross-referenced, and guarded behind tight security protocols only I had access to. The files James deleted on that bright conference room screen were essentially smoke and mirrors, surface-level illusions with no real bearing on the actual client records or my ability to fulfill my duties. Third, James failed to anticipate the strength of the client relationships I had nurtured. Over the years, these clients had come to rely on me not just for transactional account management, but for strategic guidance, market insight, and proactive problem-solving. Their loyalty was rooted in consistent communication and trust, often bypassing formal corporate channels. Discrediting me publicly would not erase the years of rapport and service I had invested. If anything, it risked alienating clients and pushing them to explore alternatives, something James had not factored into his cost-cutting calculations. Adding another dimension to this dynamic was Elliot Price, the CEO of Titan Enterprises, our firm's chief competitor. Elliot had been quietly courting me for months, recognizing my value in managing high-revenue portfolios and retaining clients under pressure. Unlike James, Elliot understood that talent and client trust couldn't be simply erased or replaced. He valued my expertise and had been preparing an offer to entice me away should the situation at Halliday & Sons deteriorate. James, however, was oblivious to this potential external leverage point, focused solely on his internal cost-cutting agenda. In retrospect, James's approach was short-sighted and reckless. His public deletion of client files was not just a professional miscalculation, it was a violation of company policy, client confidentiality, and data management protocols. But at the time, all I saw was the cold calculation behind his actions, a deliberate attempt to fracture my professional standing and force me out on his terms. The audacity of orchestrating such a public spectacle to mask what was essentially a cost-cutting maneuver was staggering. Yet beneath the surface, I felt no panic. Instead, a slow-burning resolve took hold. I knew James's moves, while bold, were flawed in their assumptions and execution. The severance clause was my shield. The encrypted backups were my sword. The client loyalty was my armor. and Elliot's interest represented the promise of a better future. James's plan might have seemed like the final play, his last attempt to control the narrative and rewrite the team's understanding of my value, but in truth, it was an opening salvo in a much larger conflict. His underestimation of my safeguards and external support would soon become glaringly apparent. The deletion of files in front of 32 witnesses was a gamble, one that failed to account for the full extent of my preparation and the legal and professional recourse at my disposal. As I sat there during that meeting, watching James methodically click through each file, I recognized the scene for what it was, a calculated betrayal designed to sever my ties without compensation. But for every file deleted, I had a backup. For every attempt to discredit me, I had documented proof. And for every hostile act, I had a network waiting in the wings. James aimed to break me publicly, but he had only set the stage for a deeper reckoning, one I was ready to meet on my own terms. After the meeting adjourned and the murmurs began to swell back into the conference room, I didn't rush to pack up my things or confront James. Instead, I retreated quietly to my office, closing the door behind me with a deliberate calm that belied the storm swirling inside. The first order of business was to verify exactly what had transpired during those harrowing minutes under the harsh fluorescence of the conference room. I pulled up the system logs, detailed digital footprints that recorded every action taken within our shared server environment. As my eyes scanned the deletion logs, a cold clarity settled in. Each click James made was documented with a precise timestamp, user credentials and file paths. The system showed a series of rapid-fire deletions, files tied unmistakably to my client portfolios, contracts, project deliverables, strategic plans, all vanished from the live database in mere seconds. Beyond the raw data, what struck me most was that these actions were executed unilaterally, without authorization from IT or department heads, flagrantly violating Halliday & Sons' internal security protocols. Unauthorized file deletion was a direct breach of company policy, a serious offense that could not be ignored, but the implications went deeper. Many of these files contained sensitive client information protected under confidentiality agreements. Deleting them without backups or proper procedure wasn't just reckless, it exposed the firm to potential legal liabilities. The risk wasn't abstract. Losing or compromising client data could trigger contract violations, penalties, and reputational damage. I knew from experience that our clients trusted us to safeguard their information rigorously. James's actions had jeopardized that trust on a public, undeniable level. Moving on, I pulled up my employment contract from the shared HR system, digitally signed, timestamped, and stored securely. I reread the severance clause, committing its precise language to memory. In cases of termination not justified by documented performance failures or gross misconduct, I was entitled to a full year's salary as severance. That clause was my safeguard, a legal anchor that James's public spectacle couldn't simply float away. His attempt to manufacture cause through this dramatic file deletion would not hold up under scrutiny, especially given the absence of any prior performance warnings or documented failures on my part. Cross-referencing the email correspondence I had with HR and other executives, a pattern emerged that confirmed James's deliberate concealment. There was no indication he informed HR of his intentions before the meeting. No formal warnings, no performance improvement plans, just a sudden public purge of client files, designed to humiliate and force a resignation. This was not just policy violation, it was a breach of fair employment practices. The absence of procedural transparency was glaring. Calmly, I began cataloging all these violations. I created a secure folder on my encrypted drive, compiling screenshots of deletion logs, copies of the severance clause, email trails showing James's lack of disclosure, and notes on client confidentiality agreements at risk. Each piece was a puzzle fragment, reinforcing the bigger picture. James's unilateral action was a calculated betrayal, one that violated company rules and endangered both my career and the firm's contractual commitments. Despite the pressure, my mind stayed focused. I began outlining a strategic response, not just reactive but proactive. I planned to activate my encrypted backups immediately. These were not mere copies. They were fully indexed, regularly updated repositories of every client file James had deleted. Stored offline, secured with multi-layered encryption only I had access to, these backups were ready to restore the client portfolios in full. This meant that, operationally, I could mitigate the damage and demonstrate my continued capability to manage the accounts despite James's sabotage. Beyond the technical response, I knew the importance of measured, documented action. I jotted down a timeline of events: James's meeting announcement, the public deletion, subsequent internal communications, or the lack thereof, and my review of contracts and policies. This timeline would become the backbone of any legal or HR proceedings I would initiate. It was evidence not just of wrongdoing, but of a deliberate pattern meant to undermine me unlawfully. In the quiet of my office, the hum of the computer fan and the faint tapping of keys filled the space as I methodically assembled my case. I wasn't acting impulsively. Every click and note was calculated. James's move, while bold and public, had left a trail. One he failed to anticipate would be meticulously documented and leveraged. My resolve sharpened. The public humiliation was only the surface. Beneath it, a foundation of contractual rights, encrypted safeguards and procedural violations, formed a fortress I was ready to defend from inside and outside the company walls. I knew this was just the beginning of a larger confrontation. The files James deleted might have been erased from the company's active system, but they weren't gone, not truly. The severance clause loomed as a potent shield, contractual firepower against wrongful termination, and the client confidentiality breaches he risked would likely draw scrutiny from legal and regulatory bodies. If I pursued this path, my next steps had to be precise, legally grounded, and strategically timed. For the first time since that meeting, I allowed myself a brief moment to breathe deeply. I wasn't alone in this. The evidence was on my side, and the silent allies of documented facts, encrypted backups, and contractual protections gave me confidence. James had made a grave miscalculation. Now, armed with knowledge and preparation, I was ready to respond, not out of anger, but with professional precision. The scene was set for a battle not fought with loud words or emotional outbursts, but with methodical, unassailable proof. The calculated betrayal was clear, but so was my path forward. I knew the next steps had to be deliberate and grounded in fact, not reaction or emotion. The way James Wentworth had pulled his stunt was reckless, but it also left an undeniable trail of evidence. I couldn't afford to let this moment spiral into chaos. Instead, I needed counsel who could dissect every piece of this puzzle and turn it to my advantage. So, the morning after the meeting, I contacted Thomas Caldwell, an employment attorney I'd known professionally for several years. Thomas had a reputation for meticulousness and a sharp eye for corporate contract disputes. I explained the situation briefly but clearly: public deletion of client files by my direct supervisor, breach of company policy, and a looming threat of wrongful termination. He agreed to meet that afternoon at his downtown office, a sleek space lined with books on labor law and corporate governance. Sitting across from Thomas, I laid out the full scope of what had happened. I handed him printouts of the deleted file logs, detailed, time-stamped entries pulled directly from the company's secure server. Each line was a small nail in the coffin of James's narrative, showing precisely when and how he had accessed and deleted files without authorization. Thomas's brow furrowed as he scrolled through the digital copies, nodding quietly. Next, I shared email correspondences, messages that revealed James's failure to communicate his intentions to HR, the complete absence of performance warnings, and the suddenness of the public deletion. These emails painted a picture of calculated deception. Thomas pointed out how this lack of procedural transparency was a violation of company policy and potentially of employment law. Then I pulled out my employment contract, specifically the severance clause that guaranteed a 12-month salary payout if I was wrongfully terminated without legitimate cause. I'd kept this clause bookmarked for years, half out of professional prudence, half out of a sense that someday this protection might matter. Thomas reviewed it carefully, highlighting the language that shackled the company to this obligation. "They'll have a hard time justifying this termination as legitimate," he said quietly. Perhaps most importantly, I presented the encrypted backup drives. These weren't just routine backups. They were comprehensive, regularly updated repositories of every client file I managed, stored offline under layers of encryption, only I controlled. I explained how James's deletions on the live system were superficial, mere smoke and mirrors. These backups ensured client portfolios remained intact and retrievable, preserving the firm's contractual obligations. Thomas leaned back, considering the dossier. "This is a strong foundation," he said. "You have clear evidence of unauthorized file deletion, breach of internal policy, and a contractual safeguard in your severance clause. Plus, you can demonstrate the firm's ongoing ability to serve clients through your backups." He paused. "Our next step is to formalize this evidence and prepare for potential legal proceedings. But first, we need to gather all available witness accounts." Following his advice, I reached out discreetly to 4 colleagues who had been present at that meeting, trusted peers who had witnessed James's actions firsthand. Each provided statements describing the public deletion and the shock it caused across the team. Their accounts reinforced the narrative of unilateral, unprofessional conduct. Back at my desk, I organized the timeline meticulously. The team meeting announcement, the deletion event, my review of the logs, my contract examination, and the witness statements. All these pieces formed an immutable chain of facts centered on James's breach of duty and the company's exposure to liability. Throughout those hours, my mind circled a single thought. They failed to account for the layers I built, the backups, the contract, and the witnesses. This wasn't just about recovering files or saving a job. It was about safeguarding the integrity of my work and asserting my professional worth. The final part of my preparation was securing the encrypted backups on 2 separate drives stored in different locations, one in a secure safe at my home, the other in a trusted colleague's custody. This redundancy ensured that even if one backup was compromised, the other would remain secure, untouchable by James or anyone else aiming to undermine me. By the end of the day, I had assembled a robust dossier: deletion logs, email correspondence, contract language, witness statements, and secure backup keys. Every item was catalogued, time-stamped, and stored with military precision. I was ready, not for a fight born from anger or desperation, but for a strategic, legally sound response that could protect my career, my clients, and my future. I left Thomas's office that evening with a sense of quiet resolve. The path ahead was clear, and though the battle lines were drawn, I felt the calm confidence that comes from preparation and principle. The next moves would require patience and precision, but I was ready to execute them. The click of that delete button at the meeting had been a beginning, but it was never the end. Sitting across from Thomas Caldwell in his polished office, I felt a measure of relief wash over me, not because the situation was any less grim, but because I now had an ally equipped with the expertise to navigate the legal labyrinth ahead. The room smelled faintly of leather-bound books and fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the sterile conference room, where James had publicly humiliated me just days before. Thomas was methodical. He pored over every piece of evidence I'd brought: digital deletion logs that bore witness to each unauthorized file removal, email threads revealing James's deceptive silence toward HR, and the ironclad severance clause in my contract. His eyes narrowed as he scrolled through the deletion timestamps, a silent acknowledgement passing between us that these weren't accidents or misunderstandings. This was a deliberate breach. "Hunter," he began, voice steady but grave, "what James Wentworth did isn't just insubordination. You're facing multiple serious violations. First, there's a clear breach of fiduciary duty. As a regional director, James is legally obligated to act in the best interest of the company and its employees. Publicly deleting your client files without authorization violates that duty outright." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle. The fiduciary responsibility wasn't just corporate jargon, it was a legal standard that James had flagrantly ignored. Thomas continued, "Then there's the destruction of company property. Those client files aren't just data, they're assets owned by Halliday and Sons. By deleting them unilaterally, James potentially committed an act of willful destruction of property. That's a serious offense, especially since it puts client contracts and corporate obligations at risk." The implications were staggering. If James's actions endangered client contracts, the company could face penalties, not to mention the irrevocable damage to trust built painstakingly over years. "And finally," Thomas said, leaning forward, "there's the violation of data protection laws. Many of those files contain sensitive client information, covered under confidentiality agreements, and possibly even data privacy regulations, depending on jurisdiction. Deleting those files without proper procedure or backups puts the company, and James personally, in hot water with regulatory bodies overseeing data security. I swallowed hard. The specter of regulatory investigations was real and ominous, but it also meant I had leverage. Thomas tapped the severance clause in my contract, his finger tracing the bolded text on the page. This is your contractual lifeline. Unless the company can prove gross misconduct, which James's own actions contradict, they are obligated to pay you the full 12 months of salary upon termination. That's a significant financial and legal shield. I felt a flicker of hope. That clause was a testament to years of negotiation and prudent counsel, now poised to protect me. He shifted gears, asking about the encrypted backups I maintained. Explaining the multiple drives, the encryption layers, and the secure storage protocols, I emphasized how these backups were updated daily and controlled solely by me. Thomas nodded approvingly. That's crucial, he said, because it means the deletion on the live system didn't compromise the firm's ability to fulfill client contracts. Your backups demonstrate operational continuity, undermining any claim that your performance was negligent. He paused, making sure I understood the full scope. We'll compile a legal dossier that includes all this: deletion logs with precise timestamps, email correspondence showing the absence of prior warnings or HR communication, your severance clause, and evidence of the backups that preserve client portfolios intact. We'll also include signed witness statements from your colleagues who saw the deletion happen. I'd already reached out to 4 trusted peers, their written accounts crucial to reinforcing the narrative of James's reckless unilateral action. Their shock and dismay mirrored what I'd sensed in the room that day, adding weight to the dossier. Thomas leaned back, calculating. With this dossier, we have grounds for a wrongful termination claim, breach of fiduciary duty, property damage, and potential regulatory complaints. But this isn't just about retaliation. It's about setting a precedent. Corporate sabotage like this can't go unchallenged. As we mapped out the next steps, Thomas stressed patience and precision, how we'd notify HR formally, preserving all communication channels, and prepare for both negotiation and litigation if necessary. His confidence bolstered my own resolve. Leaving his office, dossier in hand, I felt the tide beginning to turn. This wasn't just a personal battle, it was a systemic reckoning. James had gambled recklessly, and I had the facts, the law, and a plan to turn his betrayal into my vindication. My professional future was no longer at the mercy of impulsive decisions. It was anchored firmly in evidence and strategy. Yet even as hope flickered, I knew the path ahead held challenges. James's next moves were unpredictable, and the corporate politics swirling around us were anything but straightforward. But armed with Caldwell's counsel and a detailed legal dossier, I was prepared to face whatever came next with calm, calculated resolve. The morning after finalizing the dossier with Thomas Caldwell, I knew the next steps demanded precision and formality. This wasn't a moment for impulsive confrontation or emotional outbursts. It was a calculated move within a system I had learned to navigate over 14 years. My first priority was to make Halliday & Sons fully aware of James Wentworth's misconduct in a way that could not be dismissed or ignored. I composed a detailed letter to the HR department. The tone was professional, measured, and factual, deliberately avoiding any hint of anger or accusation that might undermine the seriousness of my claims. I outlined the timeline of events, the team meeting, James's unilateral deletion of critical client files, the violation of company policy, and the breach of client confidentiality agreements. I attached the key pieces of evidence: copies of the deletion logs, email chains proving James's failure to inform HR, and a scanned excerpt of my employment contract highlighting the severance clause. I also included a cover note with the contact information for Thomas Caldwell, my legal counsel, making it clear that any future communications about this matter should be directed to him. This signaled that I was prepared to escalate this internally and legally, but on my own terms. Sending that letter felt like taking control of the narrative in a way I hadn't been able to during the conference room humiliation. It was a formal declaration that I would not be sidelined or silenced. Almost simultaneously, I drafted my resignation letter, a document I'd hoped would never be necessary, but which was now essential to protect my interests. The letter was concise but firm, citing a hostile work environment created by a breach of contract and company policy. I noted that my resignation was effective immediately upon receipt of severance pay, a clause I invoked, confidently knowing my rights were backed by evidence and legal precedent. I refrained from any dramatic language. Instead, I maintained an air of professionalism that reflected the gravity of the situation. While I sent this letter directly to HR, I made sure to keep copies securely stored on my encrypted drives and shared with my attorney. I knew that the resignation, while voluntary, was a strategic move designed to trigger protections in my contract and to preempt any attempts by Halliday & Sons to force an involuntary termination without severance. Next, I turned my attention to my clients, the backbone of my professional life, and the true holders of trust and loyalty I had nurtured for years. I drafted individual emails to the key contacts within the top 15 accounts, carefully explaining that there would be a transition, but assuring them that their business continuity and service quality would remain uninterrupted. I did not disclose the full scope of the internal conflict. Instead, I emphasized that I was moving to a new opportunity where I would continue to advocate for their interests. I assured them that Titan Enterprises, the firm I would be joining, was fully equipped and committed to supporting their needs. This was not only a professional courtesy, but a strategic step to ensure client retention and minimize disruption. Throughout the day, I received a flurry of cautious responses, some expressing surprise, others concern, but most reaffirming their appreciation for my work and their desire to continue the relationship. These exchanges were quiet affirmations that the deep client trust I had built could withstand the internal corporate upheaval and that my professional reputation remained intact. Meanwhile, on the internal front, James Wentworth carried on publicly unshaken. He was already onboarding a junior hire, confident that his aggressive cost-cutting gambit was succeeding. Yet behind the scenes, he was oblivious to the fact that I had documented every step, every violation and every breach with surgical precision. My legal dossier was more than a shield. It was a sword poised to strike at the heart of his reckless strategy. As evening crept in, I sat back at my desk reviewing the day's communications and the steps I had taken. The balance had shifted. What began as a humiliating public act had now evolved into a methodical professional response, grounded in documented evidence and contractual power. I wasn't just reacting, I was positioning myself for the systematic consequences that were already quietly unfolding. The trap was set and I was ready for whatever came next. Within the first 48 hours after that fateful team meeting, the ripple effects of James Wentworth's ruthless sabotage began to surface in ways that only a seasoned professional like me could anticipate. The junior account manager James had hurriedly installed to replace me was unsurprisingly struggling, not just to keep pace, but to make sense of the glaring gaps left by the files James had publicly deleted. The absence of critical client data wasn't some minor inconvenience. It was a glaring disruption to ongoing projects, contract renewals, and client communications. Almost immediately, system errors started cropping up. The shared server would throw error messages when the new hire tried to access folders that no longer existed. Project timelines began to skew out of alignment because key deliverables and amendment documents were missing. Internal CRM tools flagged incomplete client profiles, triggering automated follow-ups that confused the support teams. It was like watching a carefully balanced ecosystem collapse piece by piece, and James's reckless deletion was the epicenter. Clients noticed. Within a day, I began receiving confidential messages from some of my long-standing contacts, expressing concern over missed emails, delayed responses, and unexplained disruptions. These were subtle at first. Polite inquiries veiled worries framed as general questions about service continuity, but the undertone was unmistakable. Trust was fraying. A few clients escalated their concerns internally, reaching out to Halliday & Sons corporate leadership, demanding explanations for the apparent breakdown in account management. The company's compliance and regulatory teams sprang into action, triggered by the sudden flurry of client complaints and the suspicious system anomalies. I had anticipated this. The deletion of client files, especially without proper authorization or backups, was a direct violation of data protection protocols and confidentiality agreements. Regulatory auditors opened inquiries, flagging Halliday & Sons for potential data mishandling, which meant the firm was now under formal scrutiny. This wasn't just an internal HR concern anymore. It was a legal and reputational crisis unfolding in real time. Meanwhile, James's confidence began to waver behind closed doors. His initial bravado, displayed so publicly during that meeting, was undermined by the operational chaos his actions had unleashed. I started receiving calls from his office, polite, almost desperate requests for assistance. The junior hire was floundering, and James knew it. But I kept my distance, responding only through my attorney's office. Every attempt at direct contact from James was documented meticulously by my legal team, a record that would prove invaluable should negotiations or litigation intensify. The impact on client retention was tangible and swift. Without access to critical files, the junior hire couldn't maintain the level of service I had sustained for years. Within this brief window, client satisfaction ratings dropped noticeably, and Halliday & Sons began to hemorrhage business. An estimated 12% dip in client retention emerged as early indicators. It was as if James's gambit to cut costs had backfired spectacularly, unraveling not only my role but also the very revenue streams he sought to protect. As I observed all this from a measured distance, I remained outwardly composed, conscious that every falter, every system error, and every client complaint was strengthening my position. The company's leadership was now forced to confront the consequences of James's unilateral decision. The very files he deleted in front of 32 witnesses had become the linchpin in a larger unraveling, one that exposed vulnerabilities in Halliday & Sons' internal controls and risk management. Behind the scenes, I coordinated closely with my attorney, ensuring all developments were logged and that my client's concerns were heard and addressed through appropriate channels. The client's loyalty that I had cultivated over 14 years was proving resilient, but it was being tested. I drafted communications, careful and professional, to reassure them that I remained committed to their success, even as the corporate battlefield shifted beneath us. All the while, James's attempts to regain control grew increasingly frantic. Internal memos leaked, rumors swirled, and the junior hire's struggles became common knowledge among the team. James's cost-cutting gambit wasn't just failing, it was visibly collapsing, and the corporate culture began to show cracks as whispers of retaliation and mismanagement circulated. The silent war was underway. Every system glitch, every client call, and every regulatory inquiry was a piece of the puzzle falling into place. James's initial act of public destruction had set off a sequence that no amount of spin or denial could contain. The professional and legal ramifications were mounting, and I was ready, documented, backed by counsel and supported by client trust, to see this through. The trap was no longer just set, it was springing open. And those first 48 hours were just the opening chapter of a reckoning that would change everything. After days of careful preparation, and under the steady guidance of my attorney, Thomas Caldwell, we took the decisive step to escalate matters formally. Thomas drafted and filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Halliday & Sons on my behalf, rooted firmly in the mountain of evidence we had assembled. The claim was clear and uncompromising. I was entitled to the $118,000 severance guaranteed by my contract, plus additional damages to compensate for lost client revenue, and the professional damage caused by James Wentworth's reckless and unauthorized actions. Filing the lawsuit was a pivotal moment. It marked a transition from quiet documentation and behind-the-scenes preparation to a public, legal assertion of my rights. The suit detailed not only the breach of contract through wrongful termination, but also highlighted several key violations: destruction of company property, breach of fiduciary duty, and violations of data protection laws. The language in the complaint was precise, citing specific timestamps from the deletion logs, the lack of procedural warnings, and the absence of any legitimate performance issues that could justify my dismissal. Simultaneously, the fallout inside Halliday & Sons was accelerating beyond my expectations. Regulatory bodies, alerted by formal complaints and internal audits triggered by the missing client files, initiated their own investigations. Data protection authorities scrutinized the company's handling of sensitive client information, focusing on James's unilateral deletion of files without backup or authorization. Potential penalties loomed, threatening substantial fines and mandatory corrective actions. These investigations would not only imperil James personally, but also place the company's reputation and operational standing at risk. Meanwhile, the ripple effects extended deep into client relationships. Several key clients, aware of the internal turmoil and the abrupt disruption in service, began re-evaluating their loyalty to Halliday & Sons. Recognizing an opportunity, Titan Enterprises under CEO Elliot Price moved swiftly. Within days of the lawsuit filing, many of these clients formally transitioned their accounts to Titan, bolstering my new portfolio by an estimated $1.4 million. The momentum was undeniable. My value to the industry was no longer just a claim, but a tangible, growing asset. James's attempts to negotiate a settlement quickly faltered. Despite overtures made through company legal counsel, I maintained a professional distance, allowing my attorney to handle communications exclusively. I was firm and unyielding. The contractual severance and rightful damages would not be compromised. "My lawyers will be in touch," I stated with calm certainty, when James's office reached out through indirect channels. This professional detachment sent a clear message. This was about principles, rights, and accountability, not personal vendettas. The lawsuit also brought an unexpected, sobering clarity to the broader implications of James's actions. His disregard for protocol and professional ethics had ignited a cascade of consequences that transcended our immediate conflict. The company now faced substantial legal exposure, regulatory scrutiny, and client defections, all of which underscored the gravity of his miscalculations. For me, the legal process was more than a battle for compensation. It was a vindication of years of dedication and integrity. Each filing, each documented interaction, and each witness statement reinforced the narrative that I was not just a victim of workplace sabotage, but a professional whose meticulousness and foresight had preserved both client interests and my own rights. As the lawsuit gained traction, I sensed a subtle shift in the corporate atmosphere. Colleagues who once remained silent began to whisper about the unfolding scandal. Some reached out privately, expressing support or sharing their own experiences of mismanagement and retaliation under James's leadership. The case was becoming emblematic of a deeper organizational malaise, a cautionary tale for others in the industry. Through it all, I kept my focus sharp. The path ahead was complex and uncertain, but I was equipped with the tools, counsel, and determination necessary to navigate the legal and professional challenges. The public humiliation that had sparked this conflict was now eclipsed by a systematic push for justice, one grounded in evidence, law, and the unyielding pursuit of fairness. Even as the regulatory investigations broadened and clients continued to migrate, I remained committed to maintaining professional decorum and strategic patience. Every step was calculated. Every move was designed to safeguard not just my immediate interests, but also the professional standards that underpin our industry. This chapter was far from over. The legal proceedings, regulatory reviews, and corporate reckonings were unfolding in real time, with consequences that would echo well beyond the conference room where James had clicked delete. But with each passing day, it became clearer that the initial act of public sabotage had triggered a chain reaction, one that would ultimately redefine the boundaries of accountability and professional respect in my career, and in the industry at large. The fallout from James Wentworth's reckless actions was swift and brutal, and it rippled far beyond the initial shock of that meeting. Within days, the company's leadership had no choice but to take his misconduct seriously. Halliday & Sons suspended James immediately, pending a full investigation into his unilateral deletion of critical client files. The announcement was terse, delivered in a company-wide email that barely concealed the company's growing alarm. It was the first public sign that the firm recognized the gravity of what James had done, and that he had overstepped in a way that could no longer be ignored. The investigation itself was comprehensive and unrelenting. Internal auditors combed through system logs, employee testimonies, and email correspondences, each piece feeding into a mounting dossier on James's misdeeds. Regulatory bodies quickly followed suit. Data protection authorities launched formal inquiries into Halliday & Sons' compliance with client confidentiality and cybersecurity standards. The clock was ticking, and the company's compliance officers found themselves under intense pressure to respond and contain the escalating crisis. Financial consequences soon began to surface. The regulatory fines started to stack up, surpassing $250,000, an amount that sent ripples through the firm's executive ranks. These penalties weren't just abstract numbers. They reflected serious breaches of trust and law, impacting the company's bottom line and its reputation in the market. Investors took notice. Halliday & Sons' stock price dipped sharply, falling by 8% in a matter of days. The ticker's downward slide on the trading floor was a stark visual reminder that corporate mismanagement carries tangible consequences, affecting shareholders and employees alike. The company's troubles didn't stop there. Whispers of internal dissent and frustration spread quickly through the ranks. Several employees stepped forward confidentially, sharing stories of similar retaliatory behavior and toxic management practices under James's tenure. These revelations painted a picture of a fractured corporate culture, one where fear and retribution had replaced collaboration and trust. For many, the scandal was confirmation of long-held suspicions that the firm's leadership had failed to uphold professional and ethical standards. Media outlets caught wind of the unfolding drama, turning what was once a quiet internal conflict into a public relations nightmare. Industry publications and business news sites reported on the suspension of a regional director amid allegations of data sabotage and wrongful termination lawsuits. Headlines highlighted the firm's regulatory woes and the potential damage to client relationships. This mounting negative press further eroded Halliday & Sons' standing in the competitive market, driving a wedge between the company and its clients. James's personal situation deteriorated rapidly. Beyond suspension, the company moved to freeze his access to internal systems and revoke all managerial privileges. Legal counsel advised Halliday & Sons to initiate asset freezes pending the outcome of investigations and potential litigation. The personal and professional fallout for James was severe. His reputation tarnished, his career trajectory abruptly halted. Colleagues who once respected him now distanced themselves, wary of association as the scandal spread. Meanwhile, I watched this cascade of consequences unfold with a complex mix of vindication and detachment. The financial security I'd secured through my severance and the signing bonus with Titan Enterprises insulated me from the turmoil that gripped my former employer. Yet, beyond the monetary aspects, there was a deeper satisfaction in seeing justice take shape through systems and procedures I had trusted and upheld. More than anything, this period underscored the power of strategic patience and meticulous documentation. The calm professionalism I maintained, even under public humiliation, had not only preserved my integrity, but had also exposed systemic failures within Halliday & Sons' leadership. The ripple effects of one calculated act of sabotage had triggered a reckoning that would echo for months, reshaping the company's policies, culture, and leadership structure. As the dust settled, my focus shifted toward the future, toward leveraging this turning point, not just as survival, but as opportunity. The company's missteps became a cautionary tale for the industry, and my role in navigating this crisis quietly established me as a figure of resilience and principled professionalism. But until then, the investigation was ongoing, the regulatory scrutiny intense and the corporate environment charged with uncertainty. The story was far from over. The courtroom was packed that day, not with spectators eager for drama, but with professionals who understood the stakes in this quiet battle of contracts, evidence, and principles. As I sat in the polished wood-paneled room, the hum of whispered legalese and the shuffle of files created a backdrop to what felt like the culmination of years of preparation and careful strategy. The judge listened intently as Thomas Caldwell laid out the case, meticulously detailing James Wentworth's reckless deletion of client files, the breach of fiduciary duty, and the destruction of company property. Each piece of evidence was presented methodically: the time-stamped deletion logs, the email trail revealing James's deliberate concealment from HR, the witness testimonies, and the ironclad severance clause in my contract. When the verdict came down, it was more than a personal win. It was a validation of every calculated step I had taken since that fateful meeting. The court awarded me $150,000, encompassing the 12-month severance guaranteed under my contract, damages for lost client revenue, and coverage for legal fees. The judge's ruling didn't just acknowledge the contractual breach, it recognized the broader professional harm done by James's actions and the ripple effects on my career and reputation. Sitting there, the weight of that moment washed over me, not in relief alone, but in the quiet confirmation that integrity and preparation could outlast even the most brazen acts of sabotage. But the consequences extended far beyond the financial compensation. Regulatory authorities, having completed their exhaustive investigation into the data breach and unauthorized file destruction, imposed fines that totaled $275,000 on Halliday and Sons. These penalties weren't mere formalities. They reflected serious violations of data protection laws and client confidentiality agreements that James had recklessly ignored. The regulatory bodies made it clear that such breaches demanded accountability and sweeping reforms, sending a message to the entire industry about the sanctity of client data and the responsibilities of corporate leadership. James Wentworth's professional standing crumbled swiftly in the aftermath. The findings from the investigation and the court's judgment led to his blacklisting from key industry associations. This was more than a symbolic rebuke. It effectively ended his career as a trusted executive in the sector. Colleagues and recruiters alike distanced themselves, wary of associating with someone whose actions had not only destroyed client trust, but also exposed his company to substantial legal and financial risks. The fallout was swift and unyielding. Simultaneously, Halliday and Sons faced internal upheaval as the board moved to restructure the firm's leadership and operational policies. Stricter data protection protocols were mandated, along with comprehensive training programs to prevent similar breaches in the future. The company pledged transparency and accountability in its communications with clients, damage control efforts that acknowledged the severity of the crisis. These actions were necessary to rebuild trust with clients and restore a damaged reputation, but they also underscored the depth of the systemic failures that James's actions had revealed. Meanwhile, at Titan Enterprises, my transition was unfolding on a very different trajectory. The influx of clients who had migrated from Halliday and Sons bolstered our market share by 9%, a tangible testament to the value of trusted relationships and professional integrity. My new role came with not only a 20% increase in salary and a $96,000 signing bonus, but also renewed respect and autonomy, elements that had been eroded at my previous firm. More importantly, I was empowered to leverage the proprietary client management systems I had developed, enhancing service delivery and client satisfaction in a supportive environment that valued, rather than undermined, my expertise. Industry peers took notice. Invitations to speak at professional forums began arriving, recognizing my ability to maintain composure and professionalism under intense pressure. Discussions about the case circulated in corporate circles as a cautionary tale about the cost of unethical leadership and the protective power of documentation and contractual rights. My experience became a reference point for integrity, resilience, and strategic foresight in the face of workplace sabotage. Through it all, I remained grounded in the lessons the ordeal had taught me. The courtroom victory and the regulatory penalties were significant milestones, but the deeper achievement was the affirmation that calm professionalism, backed by meticulous preparation, could withstand even the most calculated betrayals. This chapter of my career was a powerful reminder that justice in the corporate world isn't won through anger or confrontation. It is earned through unwavering adherence to principles, careful documentation, and a steady hand. The ramifications of this case continued to ripple across my career in the industry, but the immediate storm had passed. As the firm I left worked to heal and rebuild, I looked ahead, ready to shape the next phase of my professional journey with the confidence that comes from knowing my worth was never defined by a single moment of betrayal, but by the steady accumulation of trust, expertise, and integrity over many years. Now, standing at the helm of my new role at Titan Enterprises, I can honestly say that the storm I weathered has reshaped not just my career, but my entire perspective on professional resilience and worth. The offer I accepted, a 20% salary increase above my previous $118,000, plus a $96,000 signing bonus, was not just a financial uplift. It was a validation, a tangible acknowledgement that my skills, experience, and integrity held immense value in an industry that sometimes forgets the human behind the spreadsheets and client files. Walking into Titan's sleek Austin office for my first day, I felt a sense of calm that was foreign but welcome. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast long warm beams across the polished conference tables, the hum of productive conversations blending with the soft tapping of keyboards. Here, I was greeted not with suspicion or skepticism, but with open curiosity and respect. Elliot Price, the CEO who had extended the offer, welcomed me personally, his handshake firm but genuine. There was no need to recount the drama left behind, only a shared understanding that we were looking ahead. One of the most profound changes in this new chapter is the work-life balance I now enjoy. At Halliday & Sons, the relentless pressure and underlying tension, especially in those final months, had drained much of the joy I once found in my work. Late nights spent rebuilding deleted files, the constant vigilance against managerial sabotage, the tightrope of client retention, it all took a toll. At Titan, the culture is different. There's an emphasis on sustainable productivity and mutual respect. My proprietary client management system, the one I painstakingly built and encrypted over years, is now fully leveraged and embraced here. It's integrated into Titan's workflow, enhancing transparency and collaboration, rather than existing as shadow documentation hidden behind locked drives. The client portfolios I brought with me, those relationships nurtured through years of consistent communication and strategic insight, have thrived in this new environment. Many of my former clients transitioned with me, not out of mere convenience, but because they trusted that their business would be handled with the professionalism and care I promised. This continuity has led to an increase in managed revenue beyond what I had at Halliday & Sons by nearly 20%, reflecting not just numbers on a page, but the real impact of trust and effective partnership. Every quarterly review meeting now feels less like a battle and more like a collaborative effort toward shared goals. Beyond the numbers and the workflow, there's a renewed professional respect I feel within the team and leadership at Titan. My voice is heard without question, my strategies welcomed without hesitation. This respect is the culmination of a journey marked by quiet determination rather than loud confrontation. Invitations to industry panels and forums have begun arriving, opportunities to share not just my expertise in client retention, but the lessons gleaned from navigating professional betrayal with composure and strategic foresight. It's humbling to realize that my experience resonates with others, that the story of my resilience can serve as guidance and inspiration. Financial security, too, has brought a welcome sense of freedom. The severance payout from Halliday & Sons, coupled with the signing bonus at Titan, created a cushion that allowed me to step away from toxic dynamics without fear. It gave me the freedom to choose the right path, rather than the expedient one. This security has also enabled me to explore consulting on the side, a practice I'd long wanted to develop, but never had the bandwidth to cultivate, allowing me to advise other professionals on safeguarding their careers through documentation, contractual diligence, and measured responses to workplace challenges. Reflecting on the ordeal, what stands out most is the power of preparation and patience. The moment James Wentworth clicked delete was an opening gambit, a dramatic but ultimately shallow attempt to erode my professional standing. But beneath that surface act was a foundation I had built meticulously: encrypted backups, rigorous documentation, legal safeguards, and strong client trust. It's a reminder that in the face of betrayal and public humiliation, calm professionalism is not passive, it's active resilience. This experience reaffirmed for me that justice in the corporate world rarely arrives through emotional reactions or confrontations. Instead, it emerges from an unyielding commitment to principles, an unbreakable chain of documented facts, and the strategic use of contractual protections. It underscored the importance of foresight, not just for one's own protection, but for the integrity of the client relationships that anchor our careers. I've come to see that my professional identity is not defined by a single moment of sabotage or insult, but by the cumulative trust earned over years and the composure maintained in adversity. As I continue to lead key accounts, foster new partnerships, and expand my consulting practice, I carry with me the quiet confidence that I am valued, not because I demanded it in a moment of crisis, but because I earned it through steady, principled work. The journey is far from over. There are new challenges, new goals and new opportunities ahead. But armed with the lessons of the past, the power of meticulous preparation, contractual knowledge, and measured patience, I am ready to face whatever comes next. The calm professionalism that once masked the storm now shines as the beacon guiding my path forward.